I've been a casual user of machine translation for a long time, and I see it change and improve over the years. What's happening here?
Yeah, this is part of the broader AI revolution that we're seeing pretty much everywhere these days. Machine translation or language translation is one application of artificial intelligence or machine learning, and it has also benefited from the massive jumps in improvements in those types of technologies. I've been working with machine translation myself since about 2002, and then as part of Iconic since 2012. So we've kind of been on that journey all of this time, and we saw it was around 2016, 2017, we had the shift to what's called now neural machine translation, or NMT. And it had not only a transformational effect on the performance of the software and the quality of the translations, but also on our business. That's kind of when the technology went from being something that could possibly be a useful tool to something that had absolute real practical value in commercial settings. So that's what's happened, and it's been a big jump. You'll see a lot of the big tech players are on board. There's a lot more companies adopting this type of technology. So it's been a really exciting last couple of years.
Machine translation is quite readily available to consumers. So what does a company like Iconic bring to it?
Yeah, so that's you use the word consumer there, and I guess that's how we distinguish it. Machine translation is available as an online consumer tool quite readily, and how we distinguish is we deal in products, right? So as an enterprise user, you need a lot more than just the tool that does translation. You need a lot of the pieces, aside from the obvious commercial aspects. You need a lot of the pieces that go around the edge, and I think particularly in the world of eDiscovery, some of those extras are quite acute, and I think that there are three main ones that we focus on quite a lot: security, support, and integration. So from the security perspective, it might be obvious, but I think it's one of those things that should be stated. Providing customers with absolute clarity on what is happening to their data, where it's being processed, who is touching it, what's happening to it after is absolutely critical. And being able to be flexible depending on the needs of any particular client or matter to adjust those security settings is quite important and helps us to distinguish what we do. The second thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is customer support, right? With an online tool, take it or leave it. It is what it is. But in this industry, we're dealing with clients and matters, projects, cases of all different shapes and sizes. And the ability to be able to send an email or pick up the phone to somebody to get support with the product that you're using if you're having any issues is absolutely critical. And oftentimes it's, you're up against tight deadlines, and so that's even more important. So the ability to be able to offer support around the clock is really important as well. And then last but not least is, I mentioned integration. So that is making sure that your product fits as seamlessly as possible in the workflow of your users. We always describe the need for translation as it's like a detour from that workflow. It's not the standard requirement for you. It's not a day-to-day requirement, but when it arises, it can often be acute, high volume, and so it needs to be fast. And so the idea that you have a workflow for processing documents, it assumes that they're all in one particular language. When they're not in that language, you need to translate them as quickly as possible into the language that you're working with and keep going. So in that sense, if you have a workflow, machine translation is a detour, and getting it back online is our job to then step back and get out of the way and let the user get on with what they're doing. So from that perspective, that's how we see what we do at Iconic kind of distinguishing itself from the readily available machine translation tools there are online today.
If you go back a bit, when languages turned up in Discovery, firms would hire contract reviewers, perhaps lots of them, rooms full of them maybe, with a special language skill, and set them to work doing the translation. How does that fit with the technology that you're talking of?
So I think there is room for multiple different ways to solve particular challenges. And so when it comes to translation, you have options, like you said there, to have people review the documents in the original languages. You have the option to translate them with people, and then you have the option to machine translate them. And I think machine translation is becoming, I don't want to say the standard, but its usage is increasing massively for a number of reasons. The first is the E in the eDiscovery. Information is in electronic format. There's now a lot more of it. So the challenge we're dealing with is one scale, and it doesn't always work to throw people at challenges of scale because it's very expensive and it doesn't scale well, for want of a better terms at time. But the other thing I think is we spoke earlier about the improvements in machine translation, and I think that has had a big impact in its increased prevalence in the process. Previously, machine translation wasn't so trusted. It was a question of if it will work rather than, it does work. And I think now we've reached that point where we know it works. So it's a question of looking at where it can most effectively work in concert with humans or people in the loop. And I think that's what you're going to see. So we've seen a couple of different workflows across our clients. One can be to machine translate everything first and then have people review those documents in English. And then the ones that are flagged as important, have them reviewed by a native speaker or have them translated by a professional. Sometimes it can work the other way around, in which the documents are reviewed in the native language first, after which the ones that are important and need to be reviewed by a wider team can be machine translated into English. So it's really going to be dependent on the particular case as to what fits the needs better. And then at a certain point in the process, if you're going to court and you need to swear over something, you're going to need that professional translation. And that's where that fits in the loop. So that's particularly why what we do at Iconic is technology first as a standalone. And if our users need the human translation piece later on in the process, we can deliver that too, but we don't muddy the waters at the beginning, because I think there's quite distinct places in the process for automation at scale, and then to introduce the expert humans in the loop when it is relevant.
So when you want to get through a lot of volume very quickly, perhaps to find out what you've got, machine translation is the way forward. If you're particularly worried about whether a court is going to find a document acceptable or a translation of a document acceptable, then it's back to humans.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a triage, effectively. If you think about, there's like a funnel. There's a lot of documents up here. Let's use automation to filter them out. And then when we have a more manageable set of documents, that's when we can bring in the expert eyes to look at them directly.
Iconic works with Relativity, and you have a web app. How does all that work for eDiscovery purposes?
Yeah, so our relationship with Relativity has been a very important one for us. When we started working in eDiscovery in around 2016, we worked on a couple of matters here and there, but we weren't, actively building a product for eDiscovery. So we were able to help out some clients because we had machine translation, but we didn't have an eDiscovery product. And so I think there were a couple of times that the penny dropped. It took a couple of pennies to drop before we took some action. But there were some matters that people brought to us where we weren't able to react quickly enough because we didn't have a product that we could deploy on premise quickly enough, or we weren't integrated into a review platform that they were using. And okay, so we won some, we lost some, but it started to happen enough that we thought, okay, let's take a step back here and let's look at what we need to build a full end-to-end machine translation solution. And the obvious choice from an integration perspective in that sense was building a connector into Relativity. So that's kind of how it started off. And the business has grown very well on the back of that. I probably thought when we built our first integration into Relativity in 2017 that might be it. But we've actually had 50 different iterations of our application over the 4 years since. Obviously, Relativity has changed, so we've evolved with it. But once we put it out in the wild and had a lot of people using it, we got a lot of feedback. So that gave us an opportunity to update the application and add more features and make it more usable. And so I think yeah, that's been a really important relationship for us. And I guess to speak maybe to some of those features and the way that it's evolved, like I said, machine translation is only one small piece of what the document reviewers are doing, but it needs to have enough flexibility to allow the users to kind of hone in on what they need. So some of the kind of simple things that we've done are, the user might just have one document that they need to translate at a particular point in time, or they might have big batches of documents. So giving them the ability to choose between single translations and large scale translations. And the other part is the exact format of the translation. So you can translate native files and retain the formatting and have the layout and things like that. But that's not always necessary. Sometimes just translating an extracted text version is fine and a little bit faster. So again, giving the user the flexibility to choose between those two options as well. But actually, the translation is nearly the easy part when we talk about integrations into the likes of Relativity. But what can be more important are some of the administrative features that we implement to give users the power to see exactly what they've translated, when, who translated it, the languages, the project, so that they can use that information and communicate it to their clients as well. So even though translation is the core piece, it's actually a lot of the pieces around it, the kind of the ecosystem of the integration, and that has been critical for us as well. So it's a good relationship so far, and long may it continue.
You developed this technology originally for intellectual property and for other specialist fields. How does that shade into eDiscovery? We're seeing eDiscovery moving away from pure litigation and back into various specialist fields. You've effectively moved the other way. You meet in the middle, is that one way of putting it?
It's a good way of putting it, actually, yeah. So we've always taken the approach in Iconic of, rather than trying to be a one-size-fits-all product, to focus on specific, we call them verticals or industries or use cases. Because invariably, if you try to be one size fits all, you won't fit everything as snugly as you could. So we took that decision, and the first product that we built was for, as you said, intellectual property, so translating patent documents or patent documents. And it's not a tremendously dissimilar use case to eDiscovery. You have a patent professional is doing a search to determine if their invention is novel. They need to search across databases of information in multiple languages, because language is no excuse if you break the law. And so they need to search large volumes of foreign language to interpret it in their language. And so kind of that naturally, that's under the broader legal umbrella as well. So that's kind of naturally how we moved into eDiscovery as well. But we also have products for other sectors, such as pharma, so for let's say translating clinical trials, and let's say automotive for translating car manuals and support and things like that. But I think probably the biggest learning that we got from other sectors and use cases is what to do, what not to do, or what's important for a particular end user. Because some users might just take the machine translation as it is and run with it. Some might have higher quality requirements. And what we took from those sectors into eDiscovery is that support, like I mentioned earlier on, is absolutely key. Even though we're dealing in technology, it's a very people-oriented business. There's a lot of relationships formed. Everyone's under pressure. There's always a deadline yesterday, and so you really need to be nimble. You need to be ready to be able to set up quickly, to react quickly, to help people out, realizing that we're a cog in a wheel, in a much bigger wheel. Everything needs to keep on spinning, so you need to be quite reactive to be able to help people get through the challenges that they might have on any day-to-day basis.
Where are we going with machine technology and with Iconic's practice generally? What do you see the future holding?
So generally speaking, as a business, you can take two tracks. You can focus on improving the technology that you have, or on the other track, you can try to do more with it. So in some of our other lines of business, we're looking at doing more with the technology. So not just the translation, but maybe additional analyses of the documents afterwards, or again, that will depend on the use case. But I think in eDiscovery, or I guess more broadly, eDiscovery, litigation, regulatory compliance, we're going to stay between our lines, because I think there's a lot of tools in the workflow, and those tools do what they do very well. So I think the bases are covered there. So we're going to focus on the machine translation piece and getting that as good as it can be, because not everything is equal with machine translation when it comes to, let's say, different languages. So some languages are always going to be slightly better translations, better translations than others. So it's about looking at some of those languages where there's more room for improvement and focusing on them. And then there are other things like the ability to handle different file formats. I think everybody in this industry knows about the challenge of translating or just handling PDFs and documents like that. So there's a question of how can we improve the translation quality when the input that we're getting is not as ideal as we would like it to be. So within the e-discovery space, that's where our focus is going to be, is on just looking at what we have, and from the scientific perspective, from the underlying technology perspective, just improving that as much as we can in terms of the quality of the translations that we produce.